Hello and welcome to this Digital Camera Magazine video tutorial. Today we're going to show you how to convert your colour image into a monotone using Photoshop Elements 5. Now Photoshop Elements 5 is a fantastic piece of software. It's obviously got the enhance and convert to black and white feature. We're not going to use this on this occasion. What we're actually going to do is use a series of adjustment layers, build those up so that we've got greater control over the areas of tone and the black and white conversion. What we want to do is really to just bring out the milling wheel here in the foreground, and we also want to get quite a nice high contrast effect with this sort of mid-range landscape here. We're also going to kick the sky back a bit to make that a little bit darker and more dramatic, and we can do that quite easily by using a series of levels layers which we can then remove parts and slowly build up the contrast and the effect of the monotone image. Okay, to get started, first of all we're just going to take all of the saturation out of the image so we convert it to a straight grayscale image. To do this we go over to our layers palette, just click on the adjustment layers and go straight down to hue saturation. Once we click, we get the familiar hue saturation dialog window open, and all we want to do is move the saturation slider right down to -100, and this basically removes all of the color information, leaving us with our black and white image. Once we've done that, we can see it's gone a little bit dark, and now what we're going to do is just centralize and concentrate on different areas of the picture. So what we do is, the milling stone being our foreground and the main subject matter, we're going to start working on that. So if we just click back on our background layer, go back up to our adjustment layers and click on levels, and that brings up the familiar levels dialog window. Now what we're doing is we're not actually looking at the entire picture, we just want to look at this area here, so the milling stone itself. So we're going to correct the levels purely for that area. So if we just click on the highlight slider, just hold down our Alt key and we can see the clipping masks appear. At the moment it's completely black, but as we start to move that highlight slider along, we can start to see little dots of white coming into the picture, and just behind the levels dialog window there we can see the spread of the clipping or the highlight clipping that's going on. Now what we want to do is just bring it so we can start to see those highlights coming into the milling wheel, and we're just going to take it so we're not actually clipping any of the highlights within the wheel itself. You can see that's lightened up if we just click off the preview, and we can see how the lightness of that wheel is just coming in. And again, if we just click onto the shadow areas and we pull that in, again we can see the clipping, and what we want to do is just pull it in so we start to get some detail or some of those clipping masks appearing, and just take it off so we're not actually clipping any of those shadow areas. Okay, finally what we want to do is just to grab the midtone slider, and we just want to move that until we've got quite a nice contrasty effect on the milling wheel there. Later on we're actually going to use dodge and burn just to bring out a few of those highlights and increase the contrast of the wheel, but at the moment we've got quite a nice result there. And if I just click off of the preview, you can see it looks sort of grey and muddy. Click the preview back on and it's really brought that milling wheel out. So if I click OK, and we've now got the wheel exactly how we want. Now if we look at the rest of the picture, we can see that the sky has bleached out a bit. Also the rest of the picture isn't quite as we want it. We're actually going to start by removing some of that levels layer. So if we just select the erase tool, make sure that we've got quite a nice soft brush selected from our brush options. We've gone for a size of about 400. Mode is obviously brush. I'm going to start with an opacity of 100 just to remove all around the milling stone, and then we're going to reduce that opacity down so that we don't get any haloing around our milling stone. Not so important around this area because it's all very similar tonal range, but up in the sky and between the horizon and the sky, if you don't take that opacity right down, you'll probably end up with a bit of haloing going on. If I just start to use that erase tool just to take all of the areas around the milling stone out, and then we can just click off the visibility of that layer. We can see how it's left all of the backgrounds as it was before, but our milling stone is now brightened up and looks a lot better. Okay, we're now going to have a look at the area of land here in the foreground, and again we're going to create another levels adjustment layer. And again, if we just move that levels palette just out of the way so we can see what's going on, and if we hold down Alt again, just so that we can see those clipping masks and exactly where the clipping starts to happen. Bring those in, and again with the shadows, turn the preview off and on, and you can see how all that detail and the tone and the contrast has really increased, and we've got a much nicer looking sort of foreground landscape here. So again, if we click OK, this time again make sure that you're into the levels mask here, and again we're just going to use the erase tool just to take out the milling stone from that area, and obviously the sky, which we also don't want in that or to be affected by that levels layer. Okay, we've erased part of the sky, but now what we want to do is just to reduce the opacity right down, and what we need to do is try to avoid that haloing effect. So if we just zoom into our picture, gone up to 100%, going to reduce the size of the brush just by using the bracket tools. Left bracket tool makes it go smaller, right larger. And very carefully we're just going to go right up to the edge, remembering that we've got a nice soft brush, so it should be quite easy just to remove that, or the effect of that levels layer, any type of haloing that would have appeared. Okay, so we're happy with that. Final thing is obviously we want a really dark, dramatic sky there. So again, we're going to use yet another adjustment layer. And this time we're just purely looking at the sky. So again, hold down your Alt so you can get your highlight clipping. And we just see it coming in there at the left. And your shadows. Just adjust your midtone if it goes a little bit too dark. Also check that you're not introducing too much grain into the sky areas, and then just click OK once you're happy with the contrast of the sky. Now again, take your opacity back up to 100, make sure you've got a large erase tool selected, and what we're going to do is just remove that levels layer from the foreground. And again, as we did when we were doing the foreground, what we want to do is just use a smaller brush with a lesser opacity just to remove some of the effect of that levels layer around the horizon. And you can just check on the effect by just clicking on and off the visibility of that particular layer. And once you're happy with the result of deleting that third levels layer and you've got your sky nice and dark, we've increased the drama within the picture and the contrast. Now what we're going to do is just touch up areas around the edge of the milling stone, up here on the rocks, and we're also just going to pull out a few of the highlights just to increase the contrast of foliage in the background. So to do that, we go down to our dodge tool, which is down at the bottom. Shortcut for the dodge tool is just O, and click back onto your background layer. Make sure again you've got quite a soft brush selected, and you've got a relatively large brush size. We want to purely affect the highlights, and you need to take the exposure right down to about 5%. Now this can be a bit time consuming, but any higher than that and you're just going to push things a little bit too far very quickly. Okay, so first of all we're going to just take a look at the milling wheel, and what we want to do is just to increase the highlights. So simply just start to paint over the wheel, and you should start to see those highlights come out a little bit more and increase the contrast of the wheel. Again, we want to just pull out some of this foreground information and increase the contrast here of the highlights in the foreground and in the hedgerow going at the back. What we also want to do is just pull out a few of these midtones so we don't have such a dark shadowed area. So if we select midtones and then we just go behind the milling wheel and just start to work with the dodge tool, and you can start to see some of that information just lighten up those shadow areas in the background. And just around here in the foreground rocks, we're just going to increase the lightness of some of those mid-tones. Okay, the final thing we want to do to just increase the contrast within the picture is just do a little bit of burning. So if we go down to where the dodge tool icon, left click and hold, and we'll go down to our burn tool, or just push O again on your keyboard, and that'll automatically switch to the next tool within that family, the dodge tool, the burn tool. And then we want to go back up to our options, make sure we've got a soft brush selected, relatively large brush size. Range, we want to choose our shadows, and we want to take that exposure right down to about 5% again. And what we're going to do is just use that very quickly on the milling stone, and you can see that's just increasing the overall contrast. And again, you might want to just brush over the foreground a bit, and you're just increasing the contrast between the highlights and the shadows of the picture. Or once you're happy with that, just click back onto the hue saturation layer, and what we're going to do now is just give the image a last tweak of the levels. So open up another adjustment levels window, hold down Alt so you can check on your clipping points, give the levels one final tweak, and when you're happy with the result, click OK. Now if we compare that with the original hue and saturation, you can see that just desaturating the image leaves you with quite a grey, dull image. By adding those different levels layers and then deleting areas, you can build up quite a nice high contrast and dramatic effect. If you want to go back in and adjust any of those, say you want to make the sky just that little bit darker, just double click on that adjustment layer and you go back in and just alter that as you want. Finalize the image, we want to flatten those layers out, so just click on the very top layer, hold down Shift, click on the background layer, then go to the More tab in the top right hand corner and just click on Flatten Image, and that will compress all of the adjustment layers together, and your image is now ready for printing.